We are a 10 out of 10 point Canadian movie. Their two lead actors are Canadian. All of our key crew people, writer, director, DP, everyone is Canadian. We only have Canadian producers. We have a couple of Kenyan courtesy executive producers. And weirdly enough, if you know the Canadian content spend test, because the costs in Kenya, relatively speaking to the costs in Canada, was so relatively cheap, we are primarily a Canadian-centric costed film. So it's hard to believe that the numbers do work, even with all the lower rates and deferrals that we had to accept in order to make the film. So I'm straying a little bit. Let me. Oh, did we want to go through chronologically? Yeah, maybe I'll whip through chronologically what we did here. So Rowan came to us. It was probably June of 2012, and we had some time parameters to deal with. Rowan, again, she had been at this orphanage on this island. She got to know people. They were more than interested in cooperating with her, but we didn't know how long we'd have their cooperation, and wanted to strike while the iron was hot, because we really did want to shoot in Africa and not try to reproduce an island in Africa. Imagine how expensive that would be. And the three parameters we were working with were, there was a Kenyan election coming up in January, February of the following year. History told you that you do not want to be in Kenya during an election. I think there were 1,500 people killed the day of the election 4 or 5 years before that. So that was a goal of ours, not to be there during an election. As it turned out, we were there during the primaries for the election. We didn't do our research on that, so we did lose a day's shooting while the horns blared and people marched with the various trucks and the candidates through the town and the island where we were, and we just had to lose shots and pack up the cars and go elsewhere for shots that day. Second thing was we had cooperation of a number of the kids on the island, and when you're dealing with kids, anytime you have to worry about them growing up. So we wanted to shoot kids while they were still kids. A lot of these kids like that. That boy who you may have seen twice in that trailer, beautiful kid, was actually brand new to the orphanage. He literally couldn't even afford the uniform that the other boys had when we casted him 2 days before the shoot. Never acted a day in his life. It took a few days to break him out of his shell. Very shy kid, but perfect for the role. And in the end, he actually, in some respects, steals the show. He's so good, especially for a kid. But we knew with kids like this, we'd have to go there, shoot them once, and there was no post possible. I mean, they would be grown up. And then sadly, I hate to say, we didn't even cross our minds at the time, but some of the people who we did die with, including the host, the woman who adopted Rowan, has died subsequently from malaria. So it's not
mosquito disease.
Crossed our minds at the time that we might not have the cooperation of the very people that we were dealing with at the front end. Of course, her family is committed to the film, and the film will be dedicated to her, but you just don't know. You just don't know when you're dealing with a new group of people who will be helpful and who won't. So I guess she had come back. She met us in April. By June, Tom went with Rowan on the first scouting trip. Yep. And essentially, I think that served a couple purposes. Behind closed doors for Tom and myself as executive producers, this was to see how real this project was. Rowan is a great storyteller, and she told us about all the people and the cooperation and the story. And by the way, if it's not clear, Night Runners, this is a local, it's the local folklore. Night Runners are kind of like witches or even vampires who would attack you and possibly kill you, but most likely convert you into one of them at night. And on this island, the Rusinga Island, it's common to a number of African areas. It's just known generally that bad luck will befall you when you come across the Night Runners. So you, by day, that person are Night Runners, but by night you avoid those people. You don't go out of your home. Because the Night Runners will try to kill you and convert you. And anything that happens on this island is bad is because of the Night Runners. I was told that we had a prayer session before each meeting, and at the first prayer session I was told by one of the gentlemen that if I forget my camera on the couch, not because I'm forgetful, it's because the Night Runners are getting to me. So everything from losing your camera to AIDS is because of the night vendors. And a majority of the islanders do believe this. So that was the
urgency
story. In any event, 2 months later, I don't know if you want to talk about your scouting trip and what you encountered.
Yeah, so again, so originally we went in June of 2012, hardly over 2 years ago. The director and I went and looked over, to find locations, we find cast and crew that we could use. Again, we took a very skeleton crew with us, so basically the entire crew were locals. As Eric mentioned before, we sort of taught them how to do it. What Rowan had did when she was there before, when she wrote the script, she actually wrote the script to fit the locations. So, for example, one of the locations we shot was in this fishing village. Well, of course, in Hollywoodland, you can spend 10 hours a week great and we build a fishing village. Fortunately, she designed and wrote the script and blocked it so it could fit perfectly within the script. So we actually, at one point for one of the shoot days, actually rented the entire village and hired every single person in the village to work in the film. And you'll see it, you saw glimpses of it today. And part of it was important because we had to have cooperation from everybody. Everyone was great. Everyone had to be, behind the camera, had to be quiet, etc. And of course, as far as clothing, we had to wear nothing. And a lot of their clothing that they do wear is generally provided to the island from church groups and stuff like that. So it's a lot of donations. So you see a lot of clothes with logos on it, hats with logos, etc. So we, didn't have the rights. So if someone was wearing a T-shirt like a Blue Jay cap or something, you couldn't do it. We wouldn't have the rights to that. So we had to ask everyone in the village to dress appropriately. There was no logos. We had a logo shirt. You had to turn it inside out, etc. No cell phones. No
put your cell phone away.
You put your cell phone away and watch and stuff like that. And many times you'd be shooting a scene. I remember one of the night scenes we were shooting, where the one woman runs into the water and then swims away. A couple things happened. When we were shooting, it was pretty fabulous, but behind the camera was the entire village. So there was 200 or 300 people sitting quietly as if they were watching a movie, literally sitting there watching the shoot in front of them. And scene after scene, we'd reshoot the scene a number of times. And we had babies, we had children, and it was perfectly quiet. There were 300 people sitting there. Again, there's no electricity in this village, so there are no lights. So this is probably the first time there'd actually been lights shining in this village at night, for one thing. And we shot
they have a generator.
Everyone was quiet, even children would be sitting there watching it. It was unbelievable. And sometimes they'd want to applaud after seeing the shot. It was pretty impressive.
After each take, yeah.
After each take. And it was interesting because, as you may be aware, the most dangerous animals in Africa are not the lions and the tigers, it's actually the hippopotamus, the hippos. And the hippos are A, very fast, and B, very angry animals, and very dangerous animals. And if they, actually I was watching a movie the other day and they were talking about hippos. Because if a hippo is angry with you, it can catch you quite easily because it's a lot faster than you are on land or on water. And it will bite you in one bite, they literally cut you in half. And there was a scene in this case where the woman had to run and theoretically jump in the water and swim away. Well, we couldn't do that because at that night there happened to be a hippo swimming back and forth in front of the village. And if she would have gone in the water, that's the fact the water is quite contaminated from raw sewage. She would have, the hippo probably would have killed the actor. She would have bit her in half. So, because she had bit a woman from the village a couple weeks earlier and killed her. So there's a lot of interesting aspects depending on where you shoot, of course. That was one side.
Okay, so April, Rowan comes to us 2 months later. Tom's on the first scouting trip, finds some locations, met with some diplomats, of course, had to get used to a different way, a different approach to making a film. Unlike North America, you can't just barge into the room and make a deal and get on to the next deal. You had to sit, have tea, say hello, talk about the weather, talk about the country, and an hour later you might talk about renting a village.
It's like very interesting aside from that. It's very interesting, almost like